J Dellarosa has a wonderful one. I'm curious if you've ever received a helpful critique from someone you did not like. So much, yes. And how you handled it. I have recently received a critique from someone whose work I respect, but who I am diametrically opposed to, personally, politically, morally. While the critique was unsolicited, it turned out to be valid. I'm trying to exercise some humility and integrate it, but finding it difficult not to resort to ad hominem thinking like that frickin' jerk. Yeah. I have said many times I grew up with an artist. My father was a painter, and he had a lot of friends who were artists. And I grew up with a wonderful succession of some amazing artists coming through the house. And New Yorker cartoonists, illustrators, painters, filmmakers, musicians, all sorts of different creative people. And just from that, I learned that you could never equate the quality of someone's person with the quality of their output. It's really true. I've met some surpassingly lovely, loving people whose art was not interesting to me in any way, shape, or form. And I've met some absolute, I'll curse now, I've met some absolute shitbirds who made stuff that was transcendent to me. And I, like you, feel some of that pull of like, wow. But again, man, a rigorous point of view, to refer back to the earlier, is a really beautiful thing when it comes with real rigor. Yeah, man, you are gonna have to get. Okay, so the place to start with helpful critique from someone you do not like is to remember at work it happens all the time. Your boss tells you, hey, that thing you did, I don't like it. I want you to change it. And you know that what he's asked you to change it to isn't as good. And the answer is, great idea, boss. I once got into it with one of my supervisors at ILM, Charlie Bailey, man. He thought we were doing close-ups for the droid factory. Charlie was the model supervisor on that. And we were doing, so it was part of episode 2 where Padme's going down the conveyor belts, that whole Busby Berkeley sequence. And we were doing all the background plates of that sequence. So we had these droid conveyor belts, I think 6 or 8 of them, and we could configure them to camera however we needed to. But it meant that there was a lot of in situ model making for camera. Marty Rosenberg, the cameraman, would be like, that part's boring, make it interesting. That's what you do. So we would make it interesting. And there was this point at which I ran some fake conduit out of the side of this panel and I used solder. And Charlie came in and he was like, I don't like the solder. And he left. And I thought, I don't agree with him. And so I forgot to change the solder. And he came back and he was like, solder out. Just totally, look, he's a supervisor. I should have done it right away. But look, that's work, right? Sometimes you got to do something you disagree with. And I had to admit when I pulled it, Charlie was right. The shot looked better without it, despite my feeling like I knew what the aesthetics should be. Yeah. Yeah, man. I don't think that I have any coping mechanisms to help you through this moment, except that if you're going to be a useful human being, you have to be able and willing to find the good information wherever it lies, even if it comes from a terrible source. Yeah. And I think that what you say there, I'm trying to exercise some humility and integrate it. You don't ever have to come around to liking that person, but you do have to, in your head, pay them at least a modicum of respect for expanding your consciousness about the thing. That's really cool. That's a great question. Helpful critique from someone you do not like. We want to conflate the art and the artist. Of course we do. And it's why we have so many discussions about can you listen to R. Kelly or Michael Jackson or whoever else is a complicated complicated, there's such a not enough of a word for that, but you see what I'm talking about. We love to conflate the art and the artist, and you can try, but everywhere art intersects with each one of us is so specific and so unique that there can't be a policy. I just don't believe that a policy is. I had a young relative living with us for a little while, and they were like, well, I don't separate the art from the artist. Or maybe they had the opposite. Oh, I can totally separate the art from the artist. And I just thought, oh my God, to be 19 and to be that sure of something. I was like, really? That's fascinating. I have no idea how to do that. All right, let's see here. Oh, Mike is making stuff. Mike is making stuff's question. You have worked with cutting edge materials and tools, but also with found objects and scrap. In your experience, what have you learned about the relationship between constraints like limited tools or reclaimed materials and true creativity? So I'm going to start with the very specific question you've asked about the relationship between constraints like limited, like reclaimed materials and true creativity. Because very much the earliest art that I made would be referred to as found object art. I would find boxes or some interesting thing, and I would frame something in that box or make something and then frame it in a box. But it was a lot about bringing objects that I found separately compelling and joining them into something that was greater than the sum of their parts. And that literally grew out of the practice of being a pre-teenager and a teenager and just finding stuff in the garbage, taking it apart and making cool stuff for my room, living out my secret agent, Lego fantasies, whatever those might have been. So let me talk about the relationship between creativity and reclaimed materials. There's a difficulty in reclaimed materials. Like if you grab something really weird and compelling, I'm just looking back to see if there's anything I could readily grab. When you have an object that is particularly beautiful and compelling in and of itself, God, I really want an example here. Sorry, let me just think about this for 1 second and look around here at some antiques. Hold on 1 sec. Let's grab. There we go. Great. Here we go. Awesome. Okay, this is a military connector. This is perfect for our discussion needs. This is a military connector. It is from some project where I was trying to find the correct connector hole pattern and I failed, but I never throw anything out. So this is going to end up in a connector bin over here. But so here I have this olive drab piece of military equipment. It's got some threading, some knurling, some soldering, and it's got a great patina or patina, right? This is I don't know what kind of coating this is, but it's worn off in a very compelling way. This object is easily decades old. It carries a lot of its own narrative with it. And that is two different results. One is that it's a compelling object in and of itself, depending on how you frame it. If I put this in a black picture box, I'd stare at it and be like, what is this thing? If I put it with some other things that were sort of military associated, then it becomes maybe this other narrative. But the final assemblage won't work unless the assemblage itself transcends the things that make it up. That is, I believe, one of the biggest restrictions or constraints with assembled object art, is that the assembly itself, once you're done with it, is more than the sum of its parts. Tom Sachs likes to say 1 + 1 = 1,000,000. That's exactly where this applies. You bring these two objects together and something other happens. And I didn't even know this until I used to live in this wonderful place down on Yosemite Street in Bayview. It was in some artist lofts. This is early 90s. And one of my neighbors, Jakub Kulicek, is a Czech artist, a wonderful, wonderful artist and a wonderful dude. And at one point he was looking at this piece of mine and he was like, yeah, I was telling him this issue I was having. And he was like, it's really hard to get those objects to transcend themselves. And I was like, he put words to this thing I had known but had never articulated. How do you get the objects to transcend themselves? Well, that's the constraint. That's the difference between putting the objects together because they kind of look neat, and then putting them all together because, well, they had to be in that arrangement. And I would submit that in the getting to a final arrangement that somehow transcends itself and becomes something other, in the middle there is these things all look kind of cool together, but it's not quite done. The fact is that there is nothing like constraints to bring about a really rigorous point of view. I think we all know many films by our favorite directors when they were given no holds barred and an unlimited budget, and I don't think that many of those unlimited budget movies are our favorites. I don't want to trash anybody's specific movie, but you know, if you see some A-list directors film on Netflix and it's not quite as great as the big blockbuster movie theater films of theirs, I would submit it's because Netflix gave them almost too much freedom. There are restrictions. The restrictions yield important solutions aesthetically. Yeah, they really do. I think that almost all of my favorite movies are movies that were not necessarily fun for those directors to make. Jaws, famously not fun for Steven Spielberg to make. The Shark never worked. One of the best movies ever made, Godfather. I interviewed Francis Coppola on stage, and he said, I would say that the production of Godfather had its highs and lows, but it didn't. It was all lows and lows. Making The Godfather is one of the worst experiences of Coppola's life. He thought he was going to be fired every single day. It was not fun for him at all. And what we get out of these restrictions on this man, who's literally not even 30 when he's making that movie, what we get is unparalleled. So I love restrictions. I love constraints. I think that they're really important. I think that your last two words, true creativity, are useless. I don't think that there is such a thing as true or false creativity. I think that there is just more rigorous and less rigorous points of view, shall we say. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I wanted to briefly mention that you could become a tested member. I know, everybody is competing for you to become a member of their thing. What I want to express to you is that the Tested membership has become such an important part of the Tested family. We get tremendous feedback from the Tested members, and they expand the stories that we can tell and the things that we have access to. And you can become a part of it right now by clicking on the link below. See you in the chat.